All right, so in this episode, we are talking about what do women mean, or certain women mean, when they say, listen to women. We consult Amanda Freebairn, who writes oftentimes for Public Square magazine. She recently wrote an article called Listening to Women, or Listening Through the Narrative We Prefer, ? I think you're going to find it very interesting. This episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel and the Wavemakers podcast cruise. This is November 15th through 22nd, and it's going to be a blast. We have Jacob Hansen of Thoughtful Faith, Carden Ellis of Word Radio, the Paul brothers from the Stick of Joseph, David Boyce of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks, Jasmine Rapoli, and Dave Butler of Plain and Precious Things. We'll be traveling down the Baja Coast. This gives us a great chance to take our online community and bring everybody together face to face. It's going to be great. If you want to learn more or register, go to cwicmedia.com, go to the top at Trips and Events, click, and then go down to Wavemakers Podcast Cruise. Here's the interview. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Amanda Freebairn. Amanda, welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, you wrote an article recently for Public Square magazine in response to the little spat with Jared Halverson and Faith Matters just a couple of months ago. Let me start with this question. When a woman of faith says, listen to women, what is she saying?
Well, I think that Latter-day Saint women have a variety of viewpoints. I would never want to say there's one specific thing that Latter-day Saint women think, but often Latter-day Saint women, faithful Latter-day Saint women, are busy. We're working, we're taking care of children, we're serving in our churches and our communities, and oftentimes our voices are not necessarily the loudest ones that you see on social media. In any demographic, always the kind of most extreme voices are the ones who are the loudest, that we hear the most from. And so my point is that Latter-day Saint women, there are many Latter-day Saint women who love their place in the church. There are many Latter-day Saint women who love the support network of the Relief Society, and they love the roles that women play. They appreciate and respect the gender divisions that we have within the church. And so when I say listen to women in the church, I mean talk to your sisters and your neighbors and your friends who are in your local community, rather than those loudest voices that you see online.
So it seems, though, when you hear the loudest voices, because you do specify the loudest voices, that those are the ones that are saying listen to women. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, I think that objectively it is a good thing to listen to women. I think that when we say listen to women, though, whether it is more sort of Orthodox Latter-day Saint women, or more progressive or former Latter-day Saints, we can all have a tendency to say, when I say listen to women, I mean women who think like me. And we do need to listen to all voices, but we cannot make space to validate all voices. Not all voices can be accommodated at the same time. It just doesn't work like that in a faith community. So there does end up needing to be sort of a prioritization with who the voices that we choose to listen to are.
Well, sometimes I think that when and this could be anybody, but you know, we're talking specifically about a few women here that are saying, listen to me. And I've been in those experiences. I've spoken to those individuals often. And I don't always get this sense that listen means listen.
Right. Often it means validate me, discard your previous perspective or worldview in order to agree with mine, and that's just not always going to be the case. We can listen, and we can validate those things that we at least find understandable, or try to find some common ground. But listening is not the same thing as changing your perspective, and we could never. It just doesn't make sense, the idea that every perspective we listen to, we have to change our mind. Then we would never be able to have a perspective at all that makes any sense.
So, let's put this into context a little bit here. This is, with Jared Halverson, who I think is fantastic. I love Jared. He's giving his own kind of come follow me video on Doctrine and Covenants. I think it was section 23, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember for sure, but he's talking about Emma. And as he's talking about this, he also brings in recent studies, which I have read, that came out a couple of years ago in 2023 from Pew and others. And it was showing how in Christianity as a whole, there are now more women, especially younger, that are leaving Christianity than men are leaving Christianity. And this was the context that he was giving this in. And then there was this big backlash, this big, in the comments section, he was really getting some stones hurled at him for saying some of these things. And I thought, what did he say? I don't understand what he's saying here. And then he went on trying to do the best that he could in going on to a podcast with a few women sponsored by Faith Matters. And I went through the whole thing, listened to that whole thing. And the primary subject was, again, putting this into context, was you're not listening to women, or this is why you need to listen to women. But I didn't hear anything in his episode that said anything about not listening to women or closing the door on women's voices or anything like that. Can you make sense of that for me? Why is that the reaction when this is not what he said?
Sure. I think Jared was making a point to faithful Latter-day Saint women that, hey, many of the women around you are struggling, and you need to step up. You need to bear testimony. You need to share your witness with others. You need to support the women around you, because women are struggling, and women of faith can help them. This is a message that is much more, it's a softer version than the message men get all the time. Step up, do better, stop watching porn, get your life together, and immerse yourself in the gospel. And he was giving a really, really soft version of that in, I thought, a very respectful sort of way. But the subtext was from the critics that obviously there is a reason that women are struggling, are leaving. And instead of validating those reasons, those social issues like LGBT, the division of gender roles, instead of saying, yeah, there's a good reason for you to leave. Instead, he said, women, you need to hold to the faith. And I think that women who were struggling were frustrated because he didn't say, but there's good reason for women to not like Christianity right now.
Do you think the reaction would have been any different if it was a woman that had a platform that was giving that message?
Yes. I think that it would have been a little bit harder to criticize. However, we have historically the women, for example, sister leaders like Julie B. Beck, the ones who are a little bit, who take kind of a firmer hand when they speak to women, they do tend to get a lot of pushback. They're often called, cold, unfeeling. And so I don't think necessarily that it would have been well received if it would have been given by a woman, but it is a little bit harder when it comes from a man.
So is the message that's being returned saying, don't ask anything of us?
Right. Right. It
right?
is
Or don't
really
ask
hard.
anything of us, just validate us,
Mhm.
give us the comfort of the gospel. Jesus loves me, but don't ask anything of me.
Exactly. It is, the message is, it is really, really hard to be a Christian woman. It is really, really hard to be a Latter-day Saint woman. There are too many expectations placed on us. We have to take care of the babies. We have to do all the things. Don't expect us to be happy about it. The underlying idea is that it's just not fair. It's what the responsibilities, the gender distributed responsibilities, the way that we do it either in Christianity or Latter-day Saints in specific is not fair.
I also I saw some of the comments on his video, and some of it was because he was saying to step up. He was saying, we need you. I mean, and honestly, if you read Isaiah, it is, unfortunately, it's the last kind of line that the people of God have, and that's the women. It's like the men are going to fall first, and then if the women fall, you kind of know you're already really in trouble, right? Which, if anything, is giving an olive branch, so to speak, to women, I think, and saying you're the stronger ones, and you're holding on longer. And he was talking about that a little bit, but from a man's perspective, then what are men allowed to talk about women's issues in that sense? And or how should a man approach that differently, or what is the tactful way of doing it? Because if you're a man and you think, okay, well, I can't say anything about this, or I can't study it, or I can't bring up data, which is all he was doing, right? Jared, then how do you approach that?
I don't think there's any way for a man to kind of avoid those sort of landmines. That doesn't mean I don't think men should speak on these issues. I think that men, when they want to talk about issues that are particular to women, kind of need to be prepared that there's going to be this sort of backlash from more progressive leaning women. You can approach it, I think, in a way that validates feelings without validating a rejection of the gospel. You can point to the things that are the unique challenges that women face. You can ask for feedback the way that Jared kind of tried to go about asking for feedback. But generally, I think the better way to ask for feedback is asking for feedback from the women in your own lives and communities instead of the women on the internet.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I watched that podcast with him and the three women. I felt like it was a struggle session that he was going through at that point. It was kind of like, we need to change your mind. We need to, validate what we're saying and change. We need to change your mind, and that seemed to be more of the agenda than. I went through the whole thing. I don't know if they ever specifically went back to anything he specifically said in his podcast.
And I think what's ironic is that sort of does point to the difference between men and women, right? Men tend to, I'm sure that he approached the situation wanting to solve the problem. Men like to solve problems. Women tend more to not be looking for a solution to the problem, but they're looking to feel heard. And I think that that's just totally normal, and it's okay. But it can get out of control. It can be just like it's a problem when husbands are always trying to fix their wives' problems without listening to them. At the same time, it can also be a problem when we're just so overly focused on everybody hearing our feelings and everybody telling us, yes, that must be so hard, where we can't even ever try to fix a problem or fix our perspective.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to quote you here from your article. You said, we must choose which voices we listen to. We cannot hear and validate all perspectives. We cannot agree with everyone. In other words, just give an affirmation to everyone that brings a different perspective to us, right? So you seem to be saying here, and this is kind of a leading question, but you seem to be saying that a universal tolerance is not the answer to this.
Yes. So on a personal level, on a community-based level, I will listen as long as they're kind and respectful. I will listen to perspectives of my friends from a variety of different backgrounds, beliefs. I will, if somebody wants to talk to me about their problems with the church, with women's roles, I'm happy to listen to those things. However, when we're talking about social media, podcasts, all of these online sources that are constantly surrounding us all the time, we do have to sort of be a little bit more selective in terms of what is building me up, what is helping me get to my goals in terms of building my relationship with the Savior, in terms of, being a better Latter-day Saint, serving my ward and my community better. Those have to be the priorities, and the priorities cannot be listening to everyone, with an Instagram profile and all their comments.
Yeah, and I think being kind is important, and listening is important, as you said. The issue comes up when you go beyond that, I think, right? Where you're saying, I'm not going to stand on truth. I'm just going to affirm everything. Everything is good. Every perspective is good. Every statement is good. And so, there's a big difference. I know, we're asked not to be contentious, right? But there is going to be conflict in your life. Trying not to be contentious does not mean you're not going to have conflict in your life. And it's just a part of life. So being kind, and I think, and tolerant as far as listening to somebody, I think is really important. But when you untether that from truth, then there's a problem. And it's, and the more we retreat on that, I think there's a problem also. So the question is okay, if I don't retreat, am I being contentious? And if I'm standing on truth and not affirming everything everyone says, am I being contentious? Am I, without trying to be, right? Without trying to go out and just cause a debate, cause a problem, am I being contentious because I'm standing on truth?
I think the key for avoiding contention in those situations is just knowing when and how to respectfully end a conversation. Oftentimes, if we are trying to stand on truth, I think we can cause contention by belaboring points, even if we believe that we are standing up for our gospel principles. But on the other end, you do have to know when a conversation is not productive and may even be counterproductive. But I don't think there's like a particular amount of truth that I don't think that necessarily standing up for what you believe in is contentious, even when you're discussing it with someone who doesn't agree.
Yeah. And then the other thing that is an element in all of this, right, is being right is not more important than the person you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important principle to understand. You being right is not as important as the person. And oftentimes we want to so desperately put what we know is right out there, right? Regardless of if it's going to steamroll someone. Mm-hmm. And there's just that balance, right? It's a balance of, okay, I'm going to stand on truth. But I'm not going to try and wear this on my wrist everywhere I go, on my cuff, and say, hey, I represent this, and don't you dare try to, contradict me, right?
Right. And the internet amplifies that, right? It's so much easier. It's so much easier to temper yourself when you're face to face with someone. When you don't know somebody, when it's a random person online and you just have a teeny tiny little picture of them and that's all their humanity is to you, it makes it much easier to not step down and take a breath.
So speaking of this, taking this to the next step, you can look at the U.S. and the political situation in the U.S. right now. We're becoming very polarized on this. And it's not just a matter of the issues, right? Because there are a lot of new issues that have come up that have been a part of that polarization, I think, that were not issues, 15, 20 years ago. It used to be, okay, on one side are we going to have a larger estate tax or a lower estate tax? And is immigration good? Is it bad? stuff like that. Now we're dealing with things that are really hit home to all of us, and in terms of identity and family and religion, et cetera, right? But we are becoming much more polarized, and the church has done a pretty good job of trying to stay away from that, right? But it's tough. It's not easy, because eventually everything becomes politicized, including our own doctrine. And so it's how do we avoid looking at what we're talking about here with the situation with Jared? How do you avoid that confrontation as we become, as a people, more and more divided, I would say, politically, and how do we stay away from that? How do we not delve into our new political situations when that politics is encroaching more and more onto the issues of the family proclamation, on other issues of doctrine, on abortion and other things? How do you do that?
That's a great question. I think the first step is always to assume the most charitable perspectives from anybody that you're talking to. Assume that the person who's frustrated with you is coming from the position of really wanting truth and right and goodness, just like what you're trying to get at. They have a different worldview on how to get there, but always assuming the best of people, even when you're not quite sure if they deserve it, helps a lot. It helps create that sense of humanity in another person, when you don't assume that I'm trying to make things good and this person is trying to ruin the country. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first step. And I think the second part, again, is knowing when to disengage. And disengage does not mean that we need to appease or affirm a perspective that we don't agree with, but it means knowing when this conversation is not helpful for anybody. It's not helpful for where I'm at emotionally. My message is clearly not coming across effectively. So I'm just going to take a pause. If it's somebody that you have a personal relationship with, it's very helpful to just reaffirm your love for them. If it's somebody that you, in a situation like Jared, I think it would have been helpful for him to just disengage, to try to let it go, and just to reaffirm his love and respect and admiration for Latter-day Saint women, and know that you don't have a lot of control over when you are doing the best you can to be charitable and good. You just don't have a lot of control over what other people think or how they interpret it.
In fact, you brought this up in the article. You talked a little bit about the Musket speech called now President Paul. He reached out as much as he could to the community, saying, with tears in his eyes, how they feel for everyone. They've gone through such a many times. They've taken on the burden of this, and yet, it turns into something it wasn't. It turns into, the muskets were pointed toward the LGBT community. And there was nothing like that ever discussed. He's talking about defending and building Zion in the speech. And so you can't control that. And the more you push that with someone, I think it probably just makes it worse. My approach typically has been on the podcast is I want awareness, right? I want awareness. I want to put that out there. You're going to see everything out there. There's no way you can continue to put your head in the sand in the world that we live in now. And so, it's dissipated a little bit, but when I first started covering these issues several years ago, I got a lot of pushback saying you shouldn't even bring this up. And my point was, no, you don't understand. You're going to hear it from a lot of different sides. You're going to hear it from those that maybe are not from a faithful perspective at all. It needs to come out. You need to talk about it. You need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of it for your kids, for your grandkids. It's got to be discussed and understood and articulated, I think. And now that's dissipated a little bit. It's still there, but I think people are becoming more and more aware that these ideas are going to enter in regardless.
I think that Elder Holland was a really good example how he responded. And of course, part of it was he was going through many things health-wise, but how he responded to that sort of backlash. There was not a grand apology. There was not an attempt to sort of paper over what he had said in a sort of a softer way. He communicated a message that was good and that was needed. And then he stepped back and didn't address it again. He took a pause. I think a few years later, or maybe a year later, there was an interview with him where he said that he really regretted that people felt the way that they felt. I think that he is a very empathetic person and did not want his words to cause hurt. But sometimes truth is really hard for people who aren't ready for it.
Yeah. All right. Lightning rod question.
Okay.
Is feminism entering into the church, and do you see it as a threat?
That's a good question. I try to be careful about the word feminism because feminism has as many meanings as there are women.
Okay, why don't you cover that first to give us some context to your answer?
I mean, I kind of still think of myself as a feminist. I think of myself as someone who cares about women's issues that impact women uniquely. I care about women's well-being, and I know that people who don't describe themselves as feminists care about those things too. But I like to think that is a primary focus of my writing, of my work, is thinking specifically about women and their needs and how to build women up better. And so for me, that is what ideally feminism would mean. But of course, in many feminist groups and feminist movements, there tends to be a lot of sort of misandry and a lot of grievance and spite that doesn't really represent kind of my perspective, how I view men. I appreciate men. I'm married to one. I could not make it through life without the balance that he provides for me, nor could wards function without the support of the men who lead in wards. So I really I think there's got to be a kind of feminism that is that cares specifically for women and women's issues without having man hatred. But maybe that's a little bit overly optimistic because it's certainly not the state of things now.
So do you see this as a threat at all, moving into the church? I mean, you're obviously you're creating somewhat of a spectrum here, right, for feminism. But is there any part of that feminism that you see as a threat?
I think there are aspects of progressive culture that are seeping into more the thoughts and beliefs of more Latter-day Saint women. And I think that it is a threat. I think that it weaponizes the natural empathy that women have. And the whole goal is to make women feel bad, like they are bad people, if they uphold the doctrines of the church, that they are hurting others. You see that whether it is with the LGBT topics, whether it is abortion, the way that women, that believing, loving, good, faithful, Christ-like Latter-day Saint women are kind of getting sucked into this is by being told that, no, you're not loving enough. You need to be loving and empathetic and understanding with these people who have different life circumstances than you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question I'm going to go with here. I learned something from your article that I didn't know before. You said that you were a converted social justice warrior, recruited from being a social justice warrior. Tell me just a little bit about that, because I've had you on the show before. I didn't know that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, I was a regular, early 20s college kid where I studied English was my major.
Mm.
So in college, so you got to get a lot of progressive politics. Postmodernism is the worldview. And there was a lot of that I just accepted and took as the truth. And I don't think I was ever super extreme. I think getting married and having children relatively young kind of tempers that somewhat. But during COVID and all of the outrageous things that I saw around me, where I felt like I was not, the things that people were saying, the things that the news media were saying, I didn't feel like it was true or resonated with me. Now I think I'm pretty much a boring old centrist. But yes, I definitely in the past 6 years or so have definitely changed my worldview.
Now, you were right in the middle of college then when you changed that. You did have COVID going in there, but how did that change things for you, your experience in college, as you're getting deeper into your major?
Oh, well, this was after I graduated from college.
After, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I was in grad school at the time, which was, and my master's is in education. So education is another one where you get a lot of, progressivism as truth. But it wasn't, because, it was older students. It wasn't quite the same as it would have been when I was in my bachelor's.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Amanda, I really appreciate your even-keeled approach to all of these things. You have some sensibility that's nice and refreshing. So appreciate you coming back on the show, and hopefully we can get you back again.
Yes, thanks for having me.